What's up, everyone? My name's Pastor Brandon, and I'm so happy you're joining us today. If it's your first time with us, I certainly hope it's not your last time with us, because here at New Post Church, we lead people to love God, love people, and to make a difference. We do that by creating a church that is for the Fredericksburg region. We support local schools, women's centers, homeless shelters, and food banks to make a difference in our community. Now, let's jump into this week's message. So we are in a series right now titled Relational Vampires, and we're having some fun thinking through these people that really kind of suck the life out of us. And we're doing that because we're all going to spend time with people through the holiday season that maybe we don't normally spend time with, that we don't really like, we don't always get along with. We're going to talk about needy people. We're going to talk about manipulative or controlling people. We're going to talk about hypocritical people. We're going to talk about critical people that constantly criticize everything that we do. And again, we're starting this series this time of year because holidays are right around the corner, and you're going to be dealing with that father-in-law. He just lets you have it. He's manipulative. He's controlling. He expects you to run your family the way he ran his family. And he just needs you to understand that you should just shut up because you're younger and you don't understand, and you should just follow along with what he expects. Or you're going to run into that coworker that's just so critical of everything you do and everything you say. And you just don't want to spend any time with them because no matter what you do, they're critical of your parenting, they're critical of your church, they're critical of the way you do your job. And I mean, let's be honest, they're not even that good at their job, but yet they're going to criticize you on yours, right? Does this sound familiar with maybe some of the stuff that we've been dealing with or that we're going to deal with as we go into the holiday season? We're having some fun with it, but these are some real issues, and these are some real problems. And again, we have to answer the question, as Christians, how do we handle these people? How do we love these people? Because that's the question. It's not a matter of putting up with or dealing with them. The real question is, how do I love them? I'm not expected to tolerate them. How do I love them in their situation and what they're going through? So we've been kind of scouring the Bible, and we're going to continue looking for these stories, these moments, these things where we can glean a little bit of wisdom on how we deal with these particular people. Because again, that's the hardest part about being a Christian, right? The love God part, that's easy. I mean, come on, if we're being honest, the all-knowing, all-loving, omnipotent, wants everything for you, wants to teach you, guide you, love, and care for you, God is not hard to love. It's your neighbor that won't keep their mouth shut that's hard to love. Somebody say amen, all right? Don't say amen if you're sitting next to the person that does that to you. Okay, so I know that you have, because you're a human and you've been around for a period of time, you've been tricked or pushed into doing something that you didn't want to do. Funny story about that. We've got a family that lives next door to us. The father is going to be he's going to be, I think he's going to be 100. He's like 99 or 98. He's almost into triple digits, right? And he loves to go on car rides. It's one of his favorite things to do. So what they do is they get him into the car, and they take him, both husband and wife, they'll take him on long car rides. The guy's name is Jack, and James is the name of the husband. So Jack, I mean, he loves going on car rides. So he would get them to get in the car and take him on a car ride. What he did one time, this story that they told us that James' wife was telling us, it was so funny, was in the car, Jack kept saying, just a little bit further. And James would say, okay, we'll go just a little bit further, Jack, and then we'll turn around and go a little bit further. And then as soon as we got there, Jack would go, hold on, just a little bit further. Up there, I want to see what's up there. I want to see what's up there. I want to see what's going on up there. And every time they came to a position where James was ready to turn around and to go home, Jack would find another thing to look at to keep the ride going as long as possible. Jack was manipulating the situation and controlling James to get him to do what Jack wanted to do. And it's funny because James ended up staying out almost 3 hours, if I remember right, with Jack on this car ride all around the county. So it's funny, and I love that man, and I love hearing these funny stories that he does. But I mean, it's a funny introduction to a very real topic. Like Jack had no malicious intent or anything behind it. He just wanted to keep the ride going. But you've dealt with people before that are manipulative and controlling, haven't you? People who want to control your life, people who want to manipulate you, people that are going to try to leverage certain things to get you to do or say or behave or act or say or lead a certain way, right? They're going to leverage certain things in your life and in their life to get you to do what they want you to do. And the story of Samson and Delilah reminds us of how dangerous it can be getting too close or allowing a manipulative or controlling person in our life, and how we should really deal with them. Samson is going to be our subject today. Samson, he was a judge, in fact, that worked in the nation of Israel after the conquest that Joshua set up. When Joshua's conquest, after that, the judges were set up. So I'll give you a quick timeline so you kind of know where we are in the biblical timeline. You have the Exodus, that's Moses and Aaron. They lead the nation of Israel out of captivity. They do some jacked up stuff. Moses doesn't get to enter the promised land, wanders around for 40 years, comes up to the edge of the promised land. He gets to look over the mountain, die as he sees the promised land, and God buries him. After that, Joshua takes over, and Joshua begins to basically militarize the nation of Israel, and then takes the nation of Israel into the promised land, the land of Canaan, and begins to push back the Canaanites and the Philistines, and really drive those individuals all the way back. And there's tons of different other people groups that he is constantly fighting against. And at that time, after that, Israel said they wanted a king. And God says, no, you don't want to be, I want to be your king. Let's set up a theocracy instead of a democracy or any of the other ocracies. Let's do a theocracy, which is God as the king. And God says, I'll send judges, I'll appoint judges. So at this time, you had elders and prophets. Those are the people that led the nation. So judges didn't have absolute power. It was kind of like this thing where they all kind of balanced power around. So a better word for this judge is really a deliverer. That's what a judge was. And all these judges were called or had their own issues in which they were expected to, deliver or inspire the nation to follow God again. And they would deliver the nation from a military foe. Most of the time there was a big military problem. The elders and prophets, they would come into these issues. They weren't military men. God would raise up a judge, typically equip the judge to be able to do some stuff. Judge would take care of the situation. Judge would try to get people to come back to God most of the time. And then some things would happen after that. So the story we're going to look at today is of the judge Samson, the story of Samson and Delilah. This comes while Israel is resisting the Philistines. Samson, super strong, very, very strong individual. In fact, he defeats multiple Philistines at one time. Renowned warrior. When people said Samson, you just thought of the warrior. I think of like Spartacus, or I think of like, Ragnar Lothbrok, or one of these individuals that just, they have a reputation that precedes them. Right? Like, oh man, this is a problem. Or like Russell Crowe and Gladiator, you know what I mean? Like we've got, or Leonidas in 300, man, dude, I can rip off these awesome war movies all day long. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. You're here for the gospel, right? So Samson, super strong. He's the military guy. He's got all of these types of qualities in him. So strong, big towering individual. And he killed so many Philistines all the time. Like they would run into him and he would just decimate them. And that was a whole problem for the Philistines because they couldn't conquer Israel, because every time they would want to conquer Israel or they would press against Israel, Samson would show up and he would lead an army or a group of people where he would be slaying 20 or 30 dudes at a time. And when he's doing that, he's empowering the nation of Israel and causing fear in the Philistines. He could turn the entire battlefield all the time. And he gained his super strength from the Nazirite vow he took before God that required him to never cut his hair. People go, well, how did that happen, Brandon? That's a longer conversation. We can have that later if you want. But right now, let's stay on task. But Samson was selfish. This is important to recognize. And he didn't honor his responsibility to Israel. Samson used his strength, sure, to Israel's benefit sometimes, but then he uses it for the benefit of himself. And this eventually leads him to be deceived because he is so selfish. So, after Samson is defeated, people is pressed back, the Philistines have constantly tried to figure out a way to kill Samson, and they just can't quite do it. But Samson's also not really being the way a judge should be. He's let the Philistines get away with some things. He's let his personal life interject into his responsibility. So, sometime later, the text tells us, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her, and they said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So they're going to give this woman a fortune. And they look at Delilah and they say, look, we need to figure out a way to do this because we can't deal with this Samson guy anymore. And see, the Philistines don't want to kill Samson. That's too easy. What they want to do is they want to humiliate Samson. Because if they humiliate Samson in front of Israel, then the same psychological warfare that was played by Samson when he's slaying 20 of your dudes, well, now if you can bind him, tie him up, and put him on display, that same psychological warfare happens in the opposite direction for Israel. And so Delilah, she's swayed. She says yes. She's bought off by the Philistines. Remember, the Philistines are Samson's arch enemy. In fact, the Philistines went and killed his previous family, and he goes out and destroys all of them. The Philistines are the very people that Samson was called to deliver Israel from, but his own selfishness got in the way. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. She's not mincing words here. Samson answered, if anybody ties me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man. So then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. And with men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. So she immediately tries to lean in. Samson, tell me what it is. She's leveraging and wants to control Samson for just a second. And Sammy is playing it cool, okay? He's playing it cool. He doesn't want to let her in on the secret because it's been a very useful thing for him. And it's the way that God has given him to deliver Israel. So he doesn't want to let her in on it. He doesn't know what's going on. And she continues 2 more times. And it continues with him lying to her where his abilities and strength comes from. And then she said to him, how can I say to you, or how can you say, I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time that you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. And with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Do you know anybody in your life that is nagging you day after day until you are sick to death of it? Keep your eyes up here. Don't look around, right? Don't look anywhere. Don't even look at the person you're sitting next to. She manipulated him, controlled him to get what she wanted, which was money. She leverages, don't you love me? I mean, come on, Sammy. You can't say you love me if you won't tell me this. You can't say you don't love me if you won't tell me this. So he told her everything. He said, no razor has ever been used on my head because I've been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines. Come back once more, she said. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands, the fortune that she's expecting. And after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. He wakes up and he thinks, I'm strong enough. I don't need to worry about it. I'm going to handle this problem. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the story continues. Samson is captured by the Philistines. He is indeed tied up and subdued. His eyes are gouged out, and he serves as a slave to the Philistines, the very people that he was meant to deliver Israel from. Samson was manipulated and controlled, and it cost him everything. And believe it or not, those close to you can manipulate you and control you. And if you're not careful, it can cause you something dear. In Samson's case, it caused him his eyesight, cost him his strength, cost him his calling from God. And when we deal with these controlling people, these manipulative, controlling people, they have very, very common tactics. In fact, Delilah puts them on display. She puts some of them on display, and there's really just 3 of them. There's flattery, there's threats, and there's guilt. When you deal with a manipulating person, there's flattery, there's threats, and there's guilt. There's flattery. Man, that was a great presentation. You've met these people. This was a great presentation. Hey, are you losing weight? I mean, you look great. Notice that's for the ladies. For the men, we don't ever want to be told we're losing weight. We want to be told that, oh, man, are you bulking up? You're looking good, man. You're looking stout. You look solid there, right? Like, that's what we want as men. And so you see all these different ways that they do this with flattery. And then the other part is they'll do threats. You better do it or you'll regret it, right? You'll hear things like that. Or they'll when it comes to threats, they'll exacerbate or blow up what a situation actually is. They'll say, look, if you don't do this, you're going to regret it. And it's not because I'm threatening you. Look, if you do this, listen, the organization is just going to suffer. If you do this, look, your family is just going to suffer. Look, I know you've talked to a lot of people. I know you've made a lot of decisions, but come on. This is just going to happen. It's just going to be a problem. If you don't do this, if you do this, or they'll just straight threaten you from their own. Look, you won't get anything from me anymore. I won't help out with that next project. I won't stay in the church. I'll leave. I'm not going to assist you the next time that you need help when things don't go well in your house or when things don't go well with your husband, right? They threaten us. The other way they do it is they provide guilt. They guilt us into things. You mean to tell me after everything that I've done for you, all the money I've spent, all the time that I've given, right? That's what they do. They say things like, I thought we were close. I thought we were way closer than this. I thought we were like good friends. Because the way you're behaving, good friends, they don't behave that way. Or, this is one that happens to us, you call yourself a Christian. Christians don't behave that way. This is typically coming from a non-Christian. But Christians don't behave that way. If you feel or notice any of these phrases, be aware that they might be manipulating you and they might be trying to control you. So, how do you know if you're being controlled or manipulated by someone? You often feel guilty and find it hard to say no because of the way that they are behaving, the pressure they're applying, the way that they're treating you. And you, believe it or not, over time, compromise your values. If you're compromising your values or you feel like you can't say no, then you are in danger of being controlled or manipulated. So how do we handle it, right? That's the question. Okay, Brandon, I got it, but what do I do when it comes to this? How do we handle this when we're dealing with someone who's manipulative, when someone who is just trying to hurt us or somebody that's just putting us in a dangerous position or they want to control us? And it's important to remember that when it comes to controlling somebody, a lot of times these individuals that want to control us, they don't always recognize what they're doing. Sometimes they do. And there's quite a few people that do realize what they're doing. They're trying to control us. They're trying to control the relationship. So how do we handle it? And we're going to learn from Samson's mistake, that we are going to put healthy boundaries or guardrails. If you were here a couple months ago, guardrails or boundaries in place. So if you know that there's somebody who's controlling, you know there's somebody who's going to try to manipulate you, the best thing you can do is put in healthy boundaries to say, look, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. These are things I'm going to behave. This is the way I'm going to behave. This is the way I'm not going to behave. Our relationship functions inside of these boundaries. And it's okay. Okay, look at me. It's okay to tell someone no and to distance yourself from that relationship. Not unlovingly, not rudely, not hatefully. Clearly, sternly, I'm putting healthy boundaries in place. Because here's the truth of it. You won't change manipulating people. You're just not. When it comes to somebody who wants to control you or control those around you, only God can change them. At this point, you're figuring out, how do I love them? That's the whole point of this series, a relational vampire. How do I love a relational vampire, right? You love them, a controlling person. You love them. You just don't have to get that close. You do not have to get that close. And that happens with people and family members, right? Maybe it is that cousin that comes along and they are always trying to control you to get you to say something, right? Or maybe it's your mother-in-law that's always trying to manipulate you to say something to your wife or to say something to your husband. And when that happens, there's boundaries that need to be put in place. And you need to make them clear boundaries and guardrails. You'll deal with this with people in the workplace too. Somebody will come in one day and they'll want to manipulate you. They'll want to control you. They'll see your success and they'll want to control that success. Or they'll see the way you handle things and they'll want to control you. Or they'll want to manipulate you to behave a certain way or compromise your values or compromise your vision because it just makes them uncomfortable and they don't like dealing with it. When that stuff happens, the answer is to safely put clear boundaries in place. You're still loving them, but you're doing it from a few feet away. And sometimes it's important to remember that they are behaving this way. And this was super relieving for me when my counselor helped me work through something with this. That they're behaving this way. These people behave this way, controlling and manipulating. They behave this way because of trauma that they've experienced before. So we offer grace and love, but we put healthy boundaries in place to protect us and our family. If Samson would have had boundaries in place, this would have never happened to him. All the threats, all the guilt trips, all the controlling and manipulating, right? All the twisting of words, because all these are things, all the flattery wouldn't have moved Samson at all if he would have had healthy boundaries in place, recognizing this is an individual that can control me. I don't want to say they're a controlling individual or they're a manipulative individual because they're more than just that thing, right? They're more than their sin. They're more than their brokenness. So we don't want to say that they are this. They have these qualities. They have these qualities. And that's a person that I need to safely distance myself from. And because of that, their relationship, and this is the truth of it, and this is the reality that sometimes we need to have with our family members. This is a reality we need to have sometimes with our coworkers or even maybe our friends. That their behavior has placed a limitation on this relationship. Their behavior, the way they want to try to manipulate you, the way they want to try to control you, has placed a limitation on this relationship because ultimately the trust has been broken. And you hear me say it all the time. Trust is the currency of relationships. Relationships are a continuous and constant exchange of trust between one individual and another. And if I don't believe or I can't trust your intentions, And I can't trust and I don't believe that you aren't trying to get your way or manipulate me, or I'm not just a commodity or not just a product for you, or just a means to an end to get what you want in the corporation, or a means to an end to get the family to behave the way you want it to. If that's not the case and trust isn't constantly passed back and forth, then a limitation has been placed on this relationship. And you have every right and every experience and should step back and say, we need to put some healthy boundaries in place. Their behavior has placed a limitation on the relationship. And again, if Samson would have recognized that, his situation would have ended up completely different. In Samson's case, he did end up finally getting the opportunity to be restored. He was restored, but he had his eyes still gouged out. And in fact, he went out in a blaze of glory, pulling the two pillars that the Philistines had tied him to, pulling them down on all the Philistine leaders. But his life was forever changed because of this person. Now, there were some personal faults going on in his life too, so I don't want to completely dismiss those. Those matter. But the pivot point was when he didn't have boundaries and guardrails up when it came to Delilah and when it came to somebody wanting to control him. And he allowed them to do that. And here's the other thing. Here's the other part. You'll run the risk of missing what God has for you if you allow people to manipulate you. You run the risk of missing what God has for you if you allow people to manipulate you. Again, we go back to Samson. Samson missed out on the opportunity to be a true judge to the nation of Israel. Now, who knows if he would have ever been there, because he was kind of a good judge, kind of not a good judge up to this point. But God had called him to be the judge and equipped him to do it. Maybe he would have, if he had boundaries in place and he wouldn't have been manipulated and he wouldn't have been controlled, maybe Samson then moves into the position where he's going to take control and he's going to be a great judge and change the trajectory of Israel. We'll never know because that never happened. Samson was deceived, he was manipulated, he was controlled, and he was eventually killed. And the truth is, this will happen to you too. If you allow someone to manipulate you, you allow someone to try to control you, they will eventually pull you away from God's purpose for you. They will pull you away from what God has for you. Because manipulating people, manipulation and control is not a Christian value. It's not a godly value. God doesn't control us. He gives us the opportunity and the opportunity to make decisions, but he doesn't control us. So if somebody's controlling or manipulating you, there's a really good chance that you're going to miss out on what God has for you. And if we're able to do this, okay, if we are able to do this, and this is so difficult because this is going to be putting up boundaries in some relationships that you don't want to put boundaries up in. This is going to be putting guardrails in relationships that you don't feel like emotionally they should have boundaries, but logically you know they should. This is going to take work. But if we can get this right, and if you're able to get this right, and if I'm able to get this right, we will have less regrets in our relationships, and we'll have healthier relationships. Because it's also operating in those boundaries that people can find healing. Maybe your interactions with them enough times over shows them what healthy life looks like, and maybe they would listen to the gospel and hear what God has to say, and that would be enough to change them. Because remember, you're probably not going to change a manipulating or controlling person. You're going to put up boundaries, protective boundaries, as this warning from Samson's life echoes loud in our culture today. And again, if you're able to do this, you'll have less regrets and healthier relationships. So, next week, we are going to talk about critical people. But before we get there, I want to pray for you guys, and then I'll see you guys next week. Father, thank you for this story of Samson and Delilah, that manipulation and control is a very real thing in our culture today, just like it was a very real thing in their culture back in those days. So, Father, I pray that that we would be smart enough, wise enough, and pay attention enough to catch those moments of manipulation or control when somebody is trying to take us away from what you have for us and take us away from our calling, because ultimately that's what control and manipulating people do. They may not mean to do it, but that's what happens. So Father, I pray that we would be aware of it, and then I pray that you would empower all of us to put in healthy boundaries moving forward so we can figure out how to handle these situations. Lord, we love you. We give you all the praise. Everyone said, amen. I'll see you guys next week.